So, how does breastfeeding affect a mother's emotional health after childbirth? Now, that's a very important question that will help us understand emotions in the mother better. Breastfeeding has both biological and psychological impacts. On the biological side, hormones like oxytocin, prolactin, they are released, which promote relaxation, bonding, and sometimes even a state of mild euphoria. Psychologically, many mothers feel empowered and connected through breastfeeding. At the same time, it's very important to keep in mind the variations. For some mothers, breastfeeding can bring in a lot of stress. Now, this stress can be due to physiological aspects like pain, it can be due to latching difficulties, it can also be due to societal pressures where one is expected to breastfeed in certain ways. It may even be due to one's own psychological factors such as personality traits. For example, expectations of breastfeeding having to be perfect in certain ways, or even aspects such as traumatic incidents that have happened in one's own life over time. So, the emotional impact of breastfeeding really depends on the context. Adequate support, physical comfort, and realistic expectations tend to make breastfeeding a more emotionally positive experience. Can breastfeeding actually reduce the risk of postpartum depression? On an average, yes, but it is a modest yes, and it is also highly context dependent. Now, studies show that mothers who wanted to breastfeed and are supported socially and they have adequate familial support have lower odds of postpartum depression. However, if breastfeeding is painful, breastfeeding itself is a pressure choice, it comes with a lot of difficulties. Now, such risks can the increase the chances of postpartum depression, not because of breastfeeding per se, but due to a mismatch between the expectation and reality. Factors such as pain, sleep loss, being judged. Now, it's also important to understand some common contributing factors to such low mood or anxiety. The first one can be physiological, such as from dehydration, hunger, lack of sleep, or other physiological factors. Second is cognitive and emotional factors that play a role. So there can be high self criticism, perfectionistic tendencies, fear of having not enough milk. There can be intrusive thoughts. There might also be previous trauma. It can be sexual trauma, obstetric trauma, making the body sensations or exposure feeling very activating, which makes one feel very vulnerable, causing low mood or stress in the mother. There can be social and cultural factors such as pressure to exclusively breastfeed. There can be stigma around public feeding. There can be very conflicting advice that one receives from relatives, friends, internet. There can be other medical or psychological factors as well, such as past history of any mental health condition, past history of thyroid related issues, anemia, and this can combine with stress, relationship related stressors, or inadequate help that one receives at home. Now, all of this can lead to low mood or anxiety during breastfeeding. What helps is to normalize the range of experiences that mothers go through, teaching brief regulation skills like paced breathing, grounding during letdown, especially thought reframing if required, if there are thoughts of being not enough, partner coaching for practical help and validation, and referral if red flags appear. So, how can mothers cope with feelings of guilt or pressure if they are unable to breastfeed? That this is something which is also quite common and a lot of mothers go through. The first thing to do is to actually acknowledge the grief, to name this as an emotion, and to help the mother understand that there was a feeding process that she hoped for, and maybe it is not following the same path right now. Sometimes this grief can be mislabeled as guilt. Sometimes it may also be guilt that the mother goes through. In such cases, it's very important to help the mother understand that connection with the baby and love for the baby is not limited to breastfeeding. So, there are a few ways in which the guilt and the grief can be addressed. We can use an acceptance and commitment based approach where the mother is helped to identify her core values as a mother with respect to her baby. So there can be core values such as I have to be responsive to my child, I need to be warm, I have to create a sense of safety. Now, once these values are identified, then we can work towards helping the mother make these achievable through other ways, not just through breastfeeding. There can also be a thought reframing that can be done, such as when a mother feels like she has failed, it can be replaced by I have made an informed decision. I have made a compassionate decision given the pain, health, work realities, or physical health realities that we are looking at. It is also important to look at bonding alternatives that can be there, such as some skin to skin contact with the baby, eye contact with the child, in responsive cues, infant led feeding, infant led communication, which can all be very important in building a very secure attachment with the infant. If one notices guilt that lasts despite all of these initial measures that are taken, it is very important that the mother is screened for postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, and an adequate referral is made in order to handle the same. So, does frequent breastfeeding cause emotional distress? Now, we need to understand that frequent feeding itself isn't harmful or does not directly cause emotional distress, but it can feel distressing when it collides with some other factors such as pain, sleep loss, having unrealistic expectations, or a lack of help itself. So, for example, in the first few weeks, if there is some sort of cluster feeding, cluster feeding is when there are many short feeds, especially in the evenings. It is which is actually something common and helps establish supply. In such situations, what can in some ways indirectly cause distress is having to be in a single position for long hours, sore nipples maybe, chores piling up, or maybe someone just saying, oh, the baby is feeding for too long. So, what really helps is that one, it is very important for the mother to understand that these patterns are actually quite expected. So, we tend to normalize patterns, different patterns of feeding that different infants have. It is also very important to establish micro rest and boundaries. What does that mean? To lie down for 10 to 15 minutes, maybe having very short breaks of 5 or 10 minutes with maybe some calming music, or having no visitors, or just having quiet time, the mother having some quiet time for herself. Sometimes even having adequate support, such as pillows, or having a particular feeding place which seems comfortable, can be very helpful. Sharing load by family members, by partner especially, such as to burp the infant right after the feeding, maybe helping with the other aspects such as diapering, chores at home, all of this really helps reduce emotional distress. The mother also having some brief regulation skills which she can use even during long feeds, such as using the 5 4 3 2 1 grounding method while feeding. Some compassionate self-talk, such as this is a hard form moment for me, acknowledging the emotion for herself, while also not engaging with thought patterns or talk patterns that can um, point towards herself being a bad mom. So, such compassionate self talk can be encouraged, which also then reduces the emotional distress.